The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction, and its ceiling disappeared into clouds of swirling light that no human eye had ever seen before this moment. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood at the center of a platform that floated above an endless sea of alien faces, and she kept her expression calm even though her heart pounded against her ribs like a drum. 2,000 species had sent their representatives to witness this historic moment, and every single one of them was staring at the small delegation of humans who had finally crawled their way out of their little blue planet and into the stars. The year was 2847 by Earth calendar, and humanity had spent 3 centuries developing faster than light travel. And now they stood before the masters of the Orion Arm, asking for a seat at the table. High Arbiter Zelthrax of the Concord spoke first, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling. Across mountains, the Assessment Bureau has completed its evaluation of the species known as humans, he announced, and his 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he read from a holographic display that hovered before his massive form. Physical specifications are as follows. Tanaka listened as the Arbiter read out humanity's biological report card, and with each word she watched the expressions of the assembled aliens shift from curiosity to something that looked very much like pity. No natural armor plating or exoskeleton. The Arbiter continued. No venom glands or toxic secretions. No electromagnetic sensitivity or echolocation capabilities. No regenerative healing beyond superficial wound closure. Intelligence quotient ranking at galactic average, and a homeworld gravity classified as moderate. A chittering sound rippled through the crowd, and Tanaka recognized it as laughter from the Keth collective delegation, a group of insectoid creatures whose exoskeletons gleamed like polished obsidian. Furthermore, the Arbiter said, the human lifespan averages less than 1 standard century, and the species requires daily unconsciousness periods of approximately 8 hours to maintain basic cognitive function. More laughter now, and this time it came from dozens of different species, each expressing their amusement in their own way. Ambassador Cathvoran of the Dominion of Scales slithered forward on his serpentine body, and his forked tongue tasted the air as he addressed the council. I move that the humans be granted provisional species status, he said, and his voice dripped with contempt that needed no translation. They are clearly incapable of contributing meaningfully to the Concord, but we are a merciful civilization, and we do not turn away those who seek shelter beneath our wings. The vote passed unanimously, and Tanaka felt the weight of 10,000 eyes upon her as the terms were announced. Humanity would receive a single barren moon in an unremarkable system at the edge of Concord space, and they would be permitted mining rights only, and they would have no vote and no voice in galactic affairs, and they would be expected to pay tribute to the Concord in exchange for protection from the dangers that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. It was, in every way that mattered, a sentence of irrelevance. Admiral Chen Wei stood beside Tanaka, and his jaw was tight with anger that he struggled to contain, and he leaned close to whisper in her ear. We should walk out of here, he said. We should tell them exactly what we think of their assessment and their mercy. But Tanaka shook her head slowly, and when she spoke her voice carried across the chamber with perfect clarity. We accept your generous terms, she said. And she smiled at the assembled aliens with an expression that confused many of them. We thank the Galactic Concord for its wisdom and its hospitality, and we ask only one thing in return. High Arbiter Zelthrax leaned forward, and his massive form cast a shadow across the human delegation. Speak your request. Human, we ask to be left alone for 50 standard years, Tanaka said. We wish to establish ourselves on our new moon without interference or observation. And after 50 years, we will return to this chamber and request a formal review of our status. A murmur passed through the crowd, and several alien ambassadors exchanged glances that suggested they found this request amusing. 50 standard years was nothing to species that lived for millennia, and some of the representatives in this chamber had served on the council for longer than humanity had possessed written language. An unusual request, Zelthrak said, but not an unreasonable one, and the council grants your petition, and you may have your 50 years of solitude. He paused, and something that might have been curiosity flickered in his ancient eyes. Tell me, human ambassador, what do you hope to accomplish in such a brief span of time? Tanaka's smile did not waver, and her eyes held a light that the Arbiter did not understand. We hope to surprise you, she said. The council chamber erupted in laughter once more, and this time even the most stoic species joined in, because the idea of these soft and fragile creatures accomplishing anything noteworthy was simply too absurd to contemplate. The Keth delegation laughed loudest of all, and their clicking mandibles created a symphony of mockery that echoed through the hall. Ambassador Keth Vorn wiped a droplet of moisture from his scaled face and shook his head. 50 years, he said to his aide. Some species take 500 years to build a single orbital station, and these creatures think they can impress us in 50. He watched the human delegation depart through the great doors of the council chamber, and he felt nothing but amusement at their pride and their delusion. They will dig their little holes and mine their little rocks, he said, and in 50 years they will return here with nothing to show for their efforts, and we will laugh at them again, and that will be the end of their story. His aide nodded in agreement, because this was how things had always been. And this was how things would always be. The strong ruled the galaxy, and the weak served them. And humanity was clearly among the weakest species the Concord had ever encountered. What could creatures who needed to sleep every single day possibly accomplish? What could beings who died of old age before their 100th year hope to achieve? The answers seemed obvious to everyone in that chamber, and not a single alien watching the humans leave could have imagined the truth, because the truth was something the galaxy had never encountered before, and the truth was something that would shake the foundations of their comfortable certainties. And the truth was that humanity had been underestimated by forces far more powerful than the Galactic Concord, and humanity had always found a way to prove them wrong. Admiral Chun walked beside Tanaka as they boarded their ship, and he could no longer contain his frustration. They laughed at us, he said. They gave us a worthless rock and told us to be grateful for it. Tanaka nodded, and her smile had not faded. Yes, she said. They did. And you are not angry. I am furious, she said. But I am also patient, and patience is something our new friends do not understand. And in 50 years, they will learn what humanity can do when we have something to prove. She looked out the viewport at the stars that stretched endlessly before them, and her eyes burned with a fire that had driven her species since the first human had looked up at the night sky and wondered what lay beyond. Let them laugh, she said. We have work to do. For 50 years the humans said nothing, and the galaxy barely noticed their absence. The Galactic Concord had more important matters to attend to, and the endless bureaucratic struggles between ancient powers consumed the attention of every ambassador and every council member. And the small colony of soft creatures on their barren moon faded from memory like a dream upon waking. The Keth Collective and the Resonance Hegemony argued over mining rights in the Cygnus sector, and their fleets circled each other like predators waiting to strike. And the council spent decades mediating a conflict that threatened to spill over into open war. Trade disputes and territorial negotiations filled the schedules of diplomats across the spiral arm, and the question of what the humans were doing on their little rock seemed utterly irrelevant to anyone who mattered. But some beings noticed, and some beings paid attention to the things that others overlooked. Intelligence Operative Rex of the Concord's Security Division was one such being. and his job required him to monitor potential threats from the edges of civilized space. And something about the human colony had begun to bother him. "They are ordering materials," he reported to his supervisor. "Massive quantities of raw ore and rare earth elements and isotopes that most species consider worthless." His supervisor, a massive creature with 6 arms and skin like granite, barely glanced at the report. "Mining colony," he said. "That is what they were assigned to do, but the quantities are unusual," Rex insisted. "They have imported more raw materials in 40 years than most developing species use in a millennium, and their export numbers are essentially zero. Perhaps they are stockpiling," the supervisor said. "Perhaps they are inefficient, perhaps they are foolish. It does not matter. They are humans. They are irrelevant." Rex accepted the dismissal because he had no choice, but he continued to watch. And he continued to wonder. 3 years later, a report crossed his desk that made his blood run cold. A Keth cargo vessel had experienced engine failure near human space, and the crew had been forced to make an emergency landing on a small asteroid to await rescue. And while they waited, they had witnessed something strange. There were ships, the cargo captain reported. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, moving in formation through the asteroid belt adjacent to the human colony. The captain's mandibles clicked nervously as he described what he had seen. "They were not like any vessels in the Concord registry," he said. "They were fast and sleek, and their movements were perfectly coordinated. And they vanished into the darkness before we could get a clear scan." The report was classified and buried, because the idea of humans building a significant fleet was absurd. And the Keth captain was probably just a fool who had mistaken mining barges for warships. But Rex kept the file, and he added it to his growing collection of anomalies of Alorian. Scientists published a paper about human physiology that was largely ignored by the academic community. But Rex read it with growing unease. "Humans do not sleep the way other species do," the paper explained. "Most species enter unconsciousness as an involuntary biological function that cannot be resisted. But humans possess a degree of control over their rest cycles that is unique in galactic biology." The paper described experiments conducted on willing human subjects, and the results were disturbing. Human test subjects were able to remain awake and functional for periods exceeding 100 hours when motivated by sufficient urgency, the scientist wrote. Their cognitive function degraded but did not collapse, and their bodies produced chemical compounds that temporarily suppressed the need for rest. Furthermore, the paper continued, humans demonstrated an ability to push through levels of physical pain that would incapacitate or kill members of other species. And they did so through what they described as willpower, a concept that has no direct translation in most galactic languages. Rex added the paper to his file and felt the cold sensation in his blood grow stronger. 1 year before the 50-year deadline, a mining accident occurred in the outer reaches of human territory, and the details reached Rex through channels that were not entirely official. A cave-in had trapped 3 human workers in a collapsed tunnel, and the conditions were catastrophic, and rescue teams estimated that reaching them would take at least 2 weeks. The atmosphere in the tunnel had been compromised, and temperatures had dropped to near freezing, and the workers had minimal supplies of food and water. And every protocol in the Concorde's emergency response manual indicated that recovery of remains would be the only possible outcome. 11 days later, the rescue team broke through to the collapsed section, and they came prepared with body bags and grief counselors. And what they found instead shattered everything they thought they knew about human biology. All 3 workers were alive. They were weak and dehydrated, and 2 of them had broken bones that had been crudely splinted, with pieces of rock and torn clothing. But they were breathing and conscious, and one of them actually laughed when the rescue team appeared. "Took you long enough," he said. And his voice was hoarse but steady. "We were starting to get bored down here." The rescue team leader, a Valorian with 3 decades of emergency response experience, could not process what he was seeing. "How?" he asked. "How is this possible?" The injured human shrugged with his one good shoulder. "We decided not to die," he said. "Dying seemed like a bad idea, so we chose not to do it." Rex read the report 7 times. And each time he felt the certainty growing in his mind that something terrible was coming. He submitted a formal assessment to the security division, and he requested that the Concord increase surveillance of the human colony. And he warned that the species they had dismissed as weak might be something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. His report was rejected, and his supervisor informed him that he was being reassigned to monitor shipping lanes in a distant sector. "You are obsessed with an irrelevant species," the supervisor said. "The humans are harmless. They have no military capability. They have no political influence. They have nothing." Rex accepted his reassignment because he had no choice. But before he left, he made one final addition to the human file. He pulled up the species assessment that the council had prepared 50 years ago, and he scrolled to the bottom of the document. And he added a single note in the space reserved for updated observations. "Species demonstrates anomalous persistence." He wrote, "Further observation strongly recommended." And then he added one more word, a word that had never appeared in the Assessment Bureau's 50,000 years of records. "Warning." The Concorde ignored his note, and the galaxy continued to spin, and the 50-year deadline drew closer with each passing day. And in the darkness beyond the borders of civilized space, in the shadow of a barren moon that everyone had forgotten, the humans continued their work. They did not sleep when there was building to be done. They did not rest when there were ships to construct. They did not stop when their bodies screamed for relief, because humanity had something to prove. And 50 years was more than enough time to change everything. The universe just did not know it yet. The 50 years ended on a day that the galaxy would never forget. And the humans sent a single transmission to the Galactic Council requesting a formal audience to renegotiate their status. High Arbiter Zelthrax received the message and felt a flicker of amusement at the memory of that small delegation of fragile creatures who had stood before him half a century ago. "Schedule them for the next available session," he told his aide. "It will be entertaining to see what excuses they have prepared for their failure." But before the audience could be arranged, events took a different turn. Ambassador Kethvorin had not forgotten the humans either, and he had spent the past decade watching the Keth Collective's influence decline while other powers rose. And he needed a victory to restore his people's reputation. The human territory was perfect for his purposes, and the barren moon and surrounding systems contained mineral deposits that the Keth could exploit. And the humans themselves would make excellent subjects for the Collective's labor camps. He submitted a territorial claim to the council, and he argued that the humans had failed to develop their assigned space in any meaningful way. And he demanded that the Concorde transfer ownership to the Keth Collective. The council debated for 3 days, and in the end they sided with Kethvorin, because the humans had no vote and no voice, and no one to speak on their behalf. The humans are hereby ordered to vacate their colony within 1 standard rotation, the council announced. Their territory and all resources contained within are now the property of the Keth Collective. Kethvorin did not wait for the humans to comply. He assembled a fleet of 400 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could reduce a planet to molten slag. And he led them personally into human space to claim his prize. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human system. And Kethvorin looked out at the barren moon that would soon belong to his people. "Broadcast our demands," he ordered. "Tell the humans they have 1 rotation to surrender their colony and prepare for relocation." The transmission went out, And for a long moment, there was only silence. Then a response came, and the voice that spoke was calm and measured and carried no trace of fear. "This is Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Human Defense Force." The voice said, "We have received your demands, and we decline. And we respectfully request that you withdraw your fleet from our territory immediately." Keth Voran laughed, and his mandibles clicked with delight at the absurdity of the situation. "You decline," he repeated. "You decline, a species of soft meat creatures with no military capability and no allies and no hope of survival." "And you decline." "That is correct," Tanaka replied. "We decline, and we ask you one more time to reconsider your actions. And if we do not reconsider, then we will defend ourselves." The laughter that erupted on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was so loud that it drowned out the hum of the engines. And Keth Voran wiped tears from his compound eyes as he struggled to compose himself. "Defend yourselves," he said. "With what? With mining equipment, with cargo haulers." With harsh language, he turned to his tactical officer and gave the order to advance. "Destroy anything that moves," he said, "and capture as many of them alive as possible. They will make excellent slaves." The Keth fleet moved forward in perfect formation. 400 warships spreading across the void like a net designed to catch a helpless prey. And every sensor on every vessel was trained on the barren moon ahead. And then the moon moved, or rather, something moved from behind the moon. And the Keth tactical officer stared at his display with an expression that his species used to indicate. "Utter disbelief, overmind," he said. "There are contacts emerging from the dark side of the moon." "How many contacts?" The tactical officer checked his readings 3 times before he answered, 12,000. "Overmind." Keth Voran felt something cold settle in his chest. Something that his people had not felt in 10,000 years of conquest and domination. Fear. 12,000 ships poured out of the darkness, like a river of steel and fire. And they moved with a coordination that seemed impossible. And their formations shifted and adapted in real time as they approached the Keth fleet. Where did they come from? Keth Voran demanded. How could they build so many ships without anyone noticing? No one had an answer. And there was no time to find one, because the human fleet was already opening fire. The battle lasted 4 hours. Every moment of it was recorded and transmitted across every relay in the sector. And billions of beings across the galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The human ships were smaller than the Keth vessels, but they were faster and more maneuverable. And their weapons punched through Keth armor like it was made of paper. But it was not the technology that shocked the watching galaxy. It was the tactics. The humans fought like nothing the universe had ever seen. And they adapted to every Keth strategy within minutes of its deployment. And they sacrificed individual ships to create openings that allowed them to destroy entire squadrons. They feinted and retreated and drew the Keth into traps that should have been obvious but somehow never were. And they struck from angles that Keth tactical doctrine said were impossible. And they refused to stop even when their ships were damaged beyond what any sane species would consider operational one human destroyer. Its hull breached in 17 places and its engines failing, rammed itself directly into a Keth dreadnought and detonated its reactor core, taking the massive vessel and 3 escorts with it into oblivion. The crew of that destroyer had been given the option to evacuate, and they had refused. "We can take one more with us," the captain had said. And those were his last words when the battle ended. 398 Keth warships were drifting wreckage scattered across the void, and the remaining 2 vessels were limping toward the edge of the system with their weapons disabled and their engines barely functional. Keth Voran was not among the survivors. His flagship had been the first target, and the humans had destroyed it with a precision strike that left no escape pods and no survivors Admiral Tanaka broadcast a message to the fleeing Keth vessels. And her voice was still calm and measured and carried no trace of triumph or anger. "Return to your collective," she said. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them that we declined their generous offer. And tell them that we will decline any future offers as well." She paused. And when she spoke again, there was something in her voice that made every being who heard it feel a chill run down their spine. "Do not return." The galaxy watched the footage in stunned silence. And analysts and strategists and military experts across 1,000 worlds tried to understand what they had just witnessed in 50 years. Humanity had built a navy that could stand against the combined fleets of the Concorde in 4 hours. They had destroyed a force that should have been unstoppable, and they had done it with ships that no one had ever seen before, using tactics that no one had ever imagined, and displaying a willingness to sacrifice that no other species could comprehend. The Assessment Bureau opened humanity's file for the first time in 50 years, and they deleted the words "provisional species status" and replaced them with something new, something that had never appeared in their records before. A single word in red letters that pulsed with urgent warning: threat. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was the largest gathering in the history of the Concorde, and for the first time in 10,000 years, every single member species had sent their highest-ranking representatives to attend. The Great Hall was packed beyond capacity, and beings who had never shared the same atmosphere stood side by side in specially designed environmental pods. And the tension in the chamber was thick enough to cut with a blade. High Arbiter Zelthrax called the session to order, and his voice trembled slightly in a way that no one present had ever heard before. "We are here to discuss the human situation," he announced, "and to determine what course of action the Concorde should take in response to recent events." A wave of murmuring swept through the crowd, and dozens of species began speaking at once in their own languages, and the translation systems struggled to keep up with the flood of voices. They destroyed 400 warships in a single engagement. Where did they get that technology? Are they planning to attack us next? "We should strike first before they grow any stronger." Zelthrax raised his 4 arms for silence, and slowly the chamber quieted. "Before we make any decisions," he said, "we must first understand what we are dealing with. And to that end, we have invited the human ambassador to address this body." The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and Admiral Yuki Tanaka walked into the hall alone. She was old now, her hair completely silver, and her face lined with the marks of decades spent carrying impossible burdens. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and they swept across the assembled aliens with a mind expression that held no fear. She walked to the center of the platform and stood exactly where she had stood 50 years ago when she had accepted the terms of humanity's humiliation. And she smiled the same smile that had confused so many beings on that day. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. "I have been waiting a long time for this conversation." Ambassador Kethrix of the Keth Collective, successor to the fallen Keth Vorin, rose from his seat with fury burning in his compound eyes. "You murdered our overmind," he snarled. "You destroyed our fleet. You have committed acts of war against the collective. And you dare to stand before us and smile." Tanaka turned to face him, and her smile did not waver. "Your overmind brought 400 warships into our space with the intention of enslaving our people," she said. "We asked him to leave, and he refused, and he laughed at us just as you are wanting to laugh at me now." She paused, and her voice grew harder. "He made a choice, and choices have consequences. And that is a lesson the galaxy is about to learn." "Is that a threat?" Kethrix demanded. "It is a fact, High Arbiter." Zelthrax intervened before the exchange could escalate further. "Ambassador Tanaka," he said, "the Council wishes to understand how humanity achieved what it achieved. And we wish to know what your intentions are now that you have revealed your true capabilities. Tanaka nodded, and she activated a holographic display that projected images above the platform for everyone in the chamber to see. You measured us by the wrong metrics, she said. You looked at our bodies and saw weakness. And you looked at our lifespans and saw insignificance. And you looked at our history and saw nothing worth noting. The display showed images of Earth, and gasps echoed through the chamber as the environmental data appeared. This is our homeworld, Tanaka said. A planet with extreme temperature variations that range from 60 degrees below freezing to 60 degrees above. A planet with constant tectonic activity that reshapes continents and buries civilizations. A planet whose atmosphere has been poisoned by volcanic eruptions and asteroid impacts so many times that we have lost count. The images shifted to show Earth's wildlife, and more gasps followed. These are some of the creatures we shared our world with, she said. Predators with teeth and claws and venom. Parasites that evolved to live inside our bodies and consume us from within. Microorganisms that mutate faster than any medical technology can track. She let the images sink in before she continued by galactic standards. Earth is what you would classify as a death world. A planet so hostile to life that colonization would never be considered. And yet humans not only survived there, but thrived. A Valorian scientist in the crowd raised a manipulator appendage. How? She asked. How did your species survive such conditions without natural defenses? We adapted, Tanaka said. Not through evolution. That process is too slow for a species with our lifespans. But through something else. Something you do not have a word for. She pointed to her head. We adapted here, in our minds. And we learned to ignore what our bodies told us and push past limits that should have been absolute. The display changed again to show human medical data. Pain is not a shutdown command for humans, she explained. It is a signal, a warning that we can choose to acknowledge or ignore. And when the situation demands it, we ignore it completely. She showed footage of the mining accident survivors. And the chamber fell silent. These 3 humans survived 11 days in conditions that would have killed any other species in hours. And they did it because they decided that dying was not acceptable. That is impossible, someone shouted from the crowd. It is not impossible, Tanaka replied. It is human. She deactivated the display and looked out at the sea of alien faces. You gave us 50 years because you thought that was nothing. But we have built civilizations in less time. We have recovered from extinction-level events in less time. We have gone from caves to stars in less time. Her voice grew stronger with each word. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat. And when you told us that we were weak and worthless and would never amount to anything, you did not break our spirit. She smiled again. And this time, there was something fierce in it. You gave us something to prove. The chamber was utterly silent now. And 2,000 species stared at the small human woman with expressions that ranged from fear to awe to something that might have been respect. We do not want war, Tanaka said. We never wanted war, and we did not build our fleet to conquer or destroy. We built it because we knew that someday someone would come to take what was ours, and we refused to let that happen. She spread her hands in a gesture of openness. We want to be part of this community. We want to contribute and learn and grow alongside you. But we will not be dismissed, and we will not be conquered, and we will not be underestimated again. High Arbiter Zelthrax leaned forward, and his ancient eyes studied the human ambassador with new understanding. What do you want? He asked. 3 seats on the council, Tanaka said. Full voting rights, recognition as a sovereign species with protected territory, and an end to the classification that labels us as weak. And if we refuse, Tanaka's smile faded, and her eyes grew cold. then we will continue to surprise you. And I promise that you will not enjoy the surprises." The silence stretched for a long moment. And then High Arbiter Zelthrax did something that no one in the chamber had ever seen him do before. He laughed. And it was not a mocking laugh, but a genuine expression of something that might have been admiration. 50,000 years. He said, 50,000 years I have served this council, and I have never met a species quite like yours. He straightened in his seat and addressed the chamber. "The council will vote on the human proposals," he announced. "And I suspect that for the first time in a very long while, we will be making the right decision." 20 years had passed since humanity's victory over the Keth Collective, and the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Keth Collective itself was barely recognizable, fractured into a dozen warring hive states that spent more time fighting each other than threatening their neighbors. And the once mighty empire that had terrorized entire sectors had become a cautionary tale about the price of arrogance, the resonance hegemony. Those ancient crystalline beings who had watched humanity's rise with growing concern had chosen wisdom over pride, and they had been the first to seek a formal alliance with the human species. Their ambassador had arrived on the human homeworld with gifts and treaties and a humility that surprised everyone who knew the hegemonies. "History, we have existed for 1,000,000 years," the ambassador had said. "And in all that time, we have never encountered a species that fought the way you fight. We have never seen beings who refuse to accept the limits of their own biology. And we have decided that it is better to stand beside you than against you." Humanity had accepted the alliance, and the hegemony had prospered from the partnership in ways that their economic models had not anticipated. But it was not humanity's military might that had truly changed the galaxy, because the humans had discovered something far more effective than weapons. They had discovered that they were useful human. Engineers traveled to failing colonies across the spiral arm and redesigned infrastructure that had been crumbling for centuries. And they did it faster and more efficiently than anyone had thought possible when the great orbital station above Helix Prime began to fall out of its stable orbit, threatening to crash into the planet below and kill billions. The Concorde's engineering corps had estimated that repairs would take 300 years. Humanity sent a team of 12 engineers who completed the work in 18 months. Human doctors developed treatments for diseases that had plagued other species for millennia. And they approached medical problems with a creativity that alien physicians found both inspiring and terrifying. They do not accept that something cannot be done, one Valorian medical researcher wrote in a paper that was widely circulated among the scientific community. They hear the word impossible, and they treat it as a challenge rather than a statement of fact. Human diplomats mediated conflicts that had burned between species for longer than recorded history, and they brought fresh perspectives and unconventional solutions that often left both parties confused but satisfied. The war between the Thrall Federation and the nomadic clans had lasted for 6,000 years, and every attempt at peace had failed, and most experts believed that it would continue until one side or the other was extinct. A human diplomat named James Okonkwo traveled to the disputed region and spent 3 years living with both sides, learning their languages and their customs and their grievances. And at the end of those 3 years, he presented a proposal that neither side had ever considered. He suggested that they stop trying to divide the disputed territory and instead share it, rotating control between the two powers on a schedule that gave each side what they valued most during the periods that mattered most to them. It was such a simple idea that both sides were initially insulted that no one had thought of it before. The peace treaty was signed within a year, and James Okonkwo became the first human to be awarded the Concorde's highest honor for diplomatic achievement, but perhaps the strangest thing that humanity brought to the galaxy was something that had no practical value at all human. Artists and storytellers began creating works that captivated audiences across the spiral arm, and alien beings who had never understood emotion found themselves moved by human music and human poetry and human tales of love and loss and triumph against impossible odds. A human composer named Elena Vasquez wrote a symphony called The Long Night that described humanity's 50 years of isolation and preparation. And when it was performed before the Galactic Council, the audience sat in stunned silence for an hour after the final note faded. I did not know that sound could make me feel, High Arbiter Zelthrak said afterward, and his voice was thick with something that his species did not have a name for everywhere they went. Humans brought their terrible and wonderful persistence, their refusal to accept limits, their insistence that anything could be achieved if you wanted it badly enough, and everywhere they went, they changed things. Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin stood before the Galactic Council on the 100th anniversary of First Contact, and she looked out at the assembled representatives with eyes that held a century of memories. She was the successor to Yuki Tanaka, who had passed away 15 years ago, surrounded by family and friends and colleagues from a dozen different species. And Chun carried the weight of that legacy with pride and determination. 100 years ago, she said, humanity came to this chamber and asked for a place among you. And you gave us a barren moon and told us to be grateful. A murmur of discomfort passed through the crowd, because the memory of that day was now a source of embarrassment for many of the older species. You called us weak, Chung continued. And you were not wrong, because we are weak. Our bodies break easily, and our lives are short, and we feel pain more acutely than most of you can imagine. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the chamber. But we get back up. Every time, no matter what, no matter how badly we are hurt, no matter how impossible the odds seem, we get back up and we keep going. Her voice grew stronger. That is not strength. Not the kind of strength you understand. It is something else. Something you never had a word for. She smiled. And it was the same smile that Yuki Tanaka had worn a century ago. We call it hope. The chamber fell silent, and then slowly, one by one, the representatives began to respond. The Valorians bowed their great heads in the gesture of their people. The crystalline beings of the resonance hegemony dimmed their internal lights in respect. The insectoid species, who had once laughed at humanity, lowered their antennae in submission. Even the fractured remnants of the Keth collective, represented now by a single delegate from the largest surviving hive state, performed the ancient gesture of acknowledgement that their people reserve for worthy adversaries. Humanity had arrived, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as partners and builders and dreamers. They had proven that weakness was not the same as helplessness, that short lives could accomplish great things, that the measure of a species was not in their armor or their venom, or their lifespans, but in their refusal to give up. The universe had called them weak, and they had answered with everything they had, and the universe would never be the same. High Arbiter Zelthrax, ancient beyond measure and wise beyond counting, rose from his seat and performed a gesture that no human had ever seen before. He knelt, all four of his legs folding beneath his massive form, and he lowered his great head until it nearly touched the floor. Welcome, he said, and his voice carried across the chamber with absolute sincerity. Welcome to the family of stars, children of Earth. Chun Wei-Lin felt tears forming in her eyes, and she did not try to hide them. Thank you, she said. We have been waiting a long time to hear those words. She looked up at the great dome of the council chamber, at the stars that shone through the transparent ceiling, at the galaxy that had once dismissed her people as worthless. And we are just getting started.